Do you want to do a photo before we start? It's often better.
Do we have our headphones on like we're official?
Oh, I usually put them there.
Where are you going?
Me telling you what to do with headphones. Oh, we've got the light. Okay, go this way.
God, go for the light.
Telling you what to do with headphones.
But it's all acting headphones. Do you want me to move further around? I know. How far should I be away? Do I need to move further in?
Yeah, go.
Show us your cans. Insisted on a photo with my cans. We had 10 years as a couple before we had children. But as I said, that feels like someone else's life. My real life began when they were born.
I didn't go into this interview thinking that I'd make Amanda Keller cry. It really was not my intention. But about halfway through our conversation, we both found ourselves in tears. Tears of love, tears of joy, tears of grief in a way, and tears for the unknown. From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, where I have candid conversations with really interesting people. Amanda Keller has been on our TV screens and in our ears for over 30 years. She's done everything from host breakfast radio to stick her head out of a submarine on national TV as a presenter on Beyond 2000. She's made people laugh, and she's also made us think for 3 decades. And now, because of all that, Amanda Keller is nominated for a Gold Logie. This is her second nomination and hopefully her first win. It's the shining star of awards in Australia, and bloody hell, she deserves it. But behind all the laughs she's given us over the years, there has been a very private home life. And she joins me now to talk about all of that, the highs, the lows, and the bits that make her life really great. Here's Amanda Keller. Hello, friend.
Hi.
Here we are, finally.
Here we are, finally.
I want to start with Harley.
I was just me sipping water, not being emotional.
Honestly, some amateurs just don't know how to behave in front of a microphone.
I'm drinking my whiskey.
You met him when you were about 26?
Yes. So we were both at Beyond 2000, and he was an editor at the time. And the first story we did, or the first time I sat with him, was to sort of go through an edit of a story. And I think an initial story when I had to do kind of an audition in a way, my first story is I had to wear a wetsuit, and I've never been horrible. You know,
Better than a bikini.
I would rather wear a space blanket if I could, even now. So to be in a wetsuit, and I didn't feel powerful enough to say I'm not comfortable here. Mm-hmm. And Harley saw the story, and I think he probably saw how vulnerable I was looking. He now says that he went for, but I'm sure he didn't. But the first time I sat with him when he was an editor, I had done this hideous story in Hong Kong. And it was a dreadful thing. It's for people who are working in a paper factory, and there was a guillotine that would come down. So they'd push the paper in, chop, and they'd take the safety guard off so that they could work faster.
I feel this isn't going to end well.
It ends as you imagine it's going to end. A number of people get their coordination wrong and they lost their thumbs. Oh. So this operation was pretty gruesome and brutal. They took the second toe and hammered it in to make a thumb. There's nothing attractive about that story. And so I went in to see, because we had file footage of the operation and of skin being wrapped around and dreadful things.
This is your first story you worked on with Harley.
The first story I worked on with Harley. So I'd done the story, I'd written the script, he was editing it, and I went and sat with him, and he had the screen in black and white. His face was green, but he had to turn the colour off because he said he was going to throw up.
Well, no wonder love bloomed from there.
Well, how could it not?
Yeah.
It wasn't instant. It may surprise you to hear. I had a boyfriend and then we broke up. Harley had a girlfriend, and he'd been married before, but he had a girlfriend and they broke up. And he asked me if I want to go to the movies with him, because we go out as a group with a whole Beyond 2000, a very social office. And he asked me to go to the movies, and I thought, I hope he's not interested. And then by the end of that night, I saw a whole other side to him, because he's got a very wry, droll sense of humour. But I saw, I want to say a softness, but that sounds rude. But I saw the soft underbelly of him, and that changed everything really. And I saw potential.
How did he show that to you?
I just think maybe he was talking about his family, his parents in New Zealand. Might have been that. Or so some of his acerbicness stripped away. And I thought, I see you and I like you.
So he let his guard down a bit.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and so and then it was full on, got married not long after. That was like 28 years ago.
He's 11 years older than you.
Yes.
he's been married before, as you said. Did that give you pause?
Not for a second. And I would counsel anyone else to take their time with something like that. But I was so sure, because we'd been friends for a while, it's almost like we had done our homework on each other without knowing it. So the romantic, sexy side was the icing on the cake because I knew him. And to his credit, I've never, ever felt like the second wife. And he's often said that communication was what led to that not thriving first up. So he was going to be – there are times in our relationship where there hasn't been great communication, and I try and remind him that's something that is so important.
Did you ever meet his first wife?
No, and I've never met her, and I don't think he's seen her since those days either.
And it was a time before social media, so you couldn't even stalk her.
Well, I'm not on Facebook, so I still can't stalk her.
Oh, you could now. That's true.
But I could.
But I just Google her.
Well, I probably could. It's
Let's
weird,
do it
isn't
now.
it? No.
You don't strike me as a bridezilla, for example. But that idea of this isn't his first rodeo, like this isn't his first wedding, did that bother you? Or this isn't his first proposal?
Isn't it weird? I was a very romantic teenager. Romance was everything. But I never felt that. And this is the first time I've thought about it. Now, 29 years later, I've never ever thought that he wanted anything less than the white wedding. It's like his life had started again with me. That's how he made me feel. And there'd been a number of years between the marriage ending and us starting up, so it wasn't like I saw the end of his relationship. It was a clean start, which probably made a difference. She wasn't in our social circle. She was in a different country.
That helps.
Maybe that made a big difference.
Also, he must have made you feel very secure, and you must have been just secure in yourself.
Which I'm not necessarily like that as a person. So I think he made me feel that he was so sure. And he'd had an interim girlfriend. If they had married, then I would have thought someone who's been married twice I would judge quite differently. And I thought even my mother might judge that someone had been married before. It had been a 14-year marriage, so it wasn't a flighty thing. So it wasn't a failure of a relationship.
Had they had kids?
No. And that was something that ended up being our journey. He'd had a vasectomy, which we had reversed, and implications of that, plus we don't know whether there were hard shells on my eggs or whatever it was, but IVF for a number of years for us to have children.
When did you find out that he'd had a vasectomy? Because that's a big moment.
It is, and I remember it very clearly. We're on a dirty weekend away in the Blue Mountains, and we were lying in bed and the air shifted as he said, I just want to tell you something. I've had a vasectomy. And I felt my throat go dry, but I was so in love and so optimistic about everything. I said, that's okay. We'll fix it, whatever. Well, that's fine. Because I saw children in my future. And he said, yes, that's great. Let's do it. But I need to tell you this. And I remember in the midst of IVF, me thinking how naive I'd been. But I don't know if I would have made a different decision, but how naive in thinking it's all okay. And there were times in that, I don't like the word journey, but there it is, the IVF journey, where I wish I'd seen someone through it, like a counsellor or something, because your darkest thoughts, you do need to express them in a safe, healthy way, not in your partner's face. But what do you want, a baby or a relationship? Because at some point you feel, I can't have both here.
Why?
Well, because in our circumstances we may not have.
Do you mean should we look for other people who we're more compatible with from a fertility point of view?
I didn't even think that far. I just thought, I want a baby, but do I want it more than I want this relationship? And I never thought yes.
How did you discover that you guys were going to have some problems? Apart from the vasectomy, was that the problem?
No, because that can be reversed. Then you see, okay, well, we're going to need some other help as well. So then you go along and have the consultation. As soon as you start IVF, you think, well, that equals baby. And when we started, 2 out of 3 people went home without a baby. The success rate was 1 in 3. So everyone knows someone who's had an IVF baby, but 2 out of 3 went home empty-handed, and that's the story you don't hear. And that's the story I didn't want to tell. So we didn't tell many people what we were doing. Although we'd been married for 10 years, no one ever asked Harley, but people would ask me constantly, are you going to have a baby? Like I think people are more aware of that stuff these days. You
Yes
wouldn't
and no.
assume it was a choice always.
I think after someone gets married, everyone's like, oh, so you're pregnant yet? And then once you're not after that first year or so, I think people get a bit more of a message. But there's still this expectation that you will and that it's going to be fine.
Very much so. And when we did, I got an email. I remember I was working with Andrew Denton on the radio, and I got an email from a guy who said, I always wondered why you weren't brave enough to have a baby. I thought, you've got no idea what I've gone through. But I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to be defined by the lack. That, that if we didn't have one, that would be part of my story, my literal story and my life narrative that the world tells about you. I think I find people are very brave to talk about the struggle before the result.
As opposed to after the outcomes, talking retrospectively about the struggle.
And I only spoke about the kids being IVF when I wrote a book. And I was going to tell this story, so I thought, well, I better tell the children. They couldn't care less. It made no difference to them. We've got friends when they were younger who've had baby through a surrogate. And so they were hearing that story before they actually knew what conception was. So, love is love and it really doesn't matter. So it made no difference to them. And I'm sure a number of their friends are probably, IVF babies too.
I've got a friend who's got IVF twins, and when they got to a certain age, she always told them how they were conceived. When they went to school one day, her son came back and went, Mum, you're not going to believe how some other kids got made.
That's disgusting.
Horrified.
You're right. That is foul.
I mean, now the idea of sharing, since the internet came along, everybody shares everything. There's blogs, there's Instagram posts. People literally tweet while they give birth and live, do Facebook lives at some of the most vulnerable, intimate moments of their life. Back then, in the 80s and the 90s, breakfast radio was really the only place that would happen, the people who were on breakfast radio, because your life was fodder. You were in people's ears every morning and it wasn't scripted. So in essence, you spoke about yourself a lot.
It is part of the job.
You were pioneers though.
Well, in a way, but I guess I do it, and that's what's made it easier to tell the story of your life. And that's what I found when I went to write the book, is that stories came more easily because I'd spoken about myself, which sounds terrible. But on that show, Andrew didn't want to talk about himself a lot. He and Jennifer are very private. And so I guess I shared stories, but I just shared funny stories rather than painful stories, I think.
And then there was that time that you were off and a story was shared about your IVF. Tell me about that.
Terrible. So we didn't want people to know, for all the reasons I've just said, is I didn't want people every month asking me, does it work, and 3 years down the track having to tell people nothing's happened. I didn't want that story. So I didn't say anything. And
how long had you been going through IVF?
A couple of years, I think. And I'd go off every day to have blood tests. I'd have a general anaesthetic after the show to have egg harvesting, like Easter, and I'd be back at work the next morning. So you just do what you have to do. Andrew knew and our producer knew, and that was about it. And I think maybe Jonesy, who's now my radio host, knew. And he didn't know, I don't think, at this stage, which is what part of this story is. So we had a segment on the show called The Rumour Mill, and we never did personal rumours. It was, I've heard that so-and-so's being dropped for State of Origin. I've heard that so-and-so's doing a movie here, whatever. And while we were on holidays, someone phoned the rumour mill, and Jonesy, who's now my radio co-host, and someone else were filling in. And up on the computer screen, a fill-in producer puts line 3, it's funny, it's Amanda pregnant. And Jonesy's pressed the button to the producer and said, why would we put that to her? And they said, no, it's a funny story. So they thought, it must be something funny. So they take the call, and it's someone who said that they saw me at an ultrasound clinic, therefore I was pregnant. And in fact, I had been at an ultrasound clinic, but because of all the drugs I was on, a pregnancy test would say I was pregnant whether I was or not. So I had to have an ultrasound at 8 weeks to find out I wasn't. So it was a devastating day. But I could have been having a check for cancer. It could be anything.
Yeah.
So the first I hear is that a friend calls and said, should I be congratulating you? I said, what are you talking about? And then we hear that this call had gone to air. And Harley was
on your
furious
radio show.
On the people who were supposed to be protecting me. Harley was furious because Harley's so private. Here I'm talking about his vasectomy. But Harley's so private that I had to convince him that we should do IVF because our privacy, I said, has to come second to our life promise of trying to have a baby. You have to put life first and deal with the rest. And so this was his worst nightmare.
That people would find out.
That people would find out and you couldn't control the story and the information and your privacy. So I phoned the producer who was on holidays. He kicked heads. And Jonesy, to his credit, was so horrified that he wrote me a letter. He still remembers where he posted it. And I was so stung, I couldn't even write back. I could see how nice the gesture was, but I had no words. I had no words to share with anybody. And so when I came back from holidays, I never spoke about it and we got on with it. And now Jonesy's probably one of my best friends in the world.
But so many people must have said to you, oh, congratulations, oh my God.
Well, we were on holidays, so not everyone was listening to the radio, thank goodness. And I can't remember actually other people saying they'd heard it, but just that it had gone out on air was enough to horrify me. And Kath O'Connor, who was our boss at the time, said, how has this happened? How has this happened? And so there was, it wasn't supposed to happen, and people appreciated that. Yeah, but it was a terrible day.
It's always the stuff up, not the conspiracy.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
It still hurts though, and the consequences are still horrendous.
Yeah.
Did you feel like a failure?
So funny you say that. Is that I'm very task-driven, and I wasn't aware that I was, and it's very easy to feel that I've been assigned this task and I couldn't complete it. And Harley never made me feel like that. I never felt like that at home, but I felt that with the doctors and the nurses and the people who took my blood. I just felt like I was letting everybody down, and that was an even bigger emotion than me not getting a baby. It was I've been assigned a task and I can't complete it. I found it very hard.
I'm not doing a good job.
Not doing a good job. And in all honesty, this strange period before the Logies feels, not comparing it to IVF, but it's like you've been assigned a task and I may not complete the task and I'm scared I'll feel like I've let people down. And I hate feeling like that. I was talking about this with Harley last night, that I wish I had less of a sense of obligation to other people because I just feel I'm always conscious about how this makes other people feel, and it's exhausting.
That's different to being competitive, isn't it? That's different to being disappointed in yourself.
Yes. If I don't win the Logie, that's great. No, it's not,
Well, it's not great.
No, it's not. But really, that's not a judgment on my work, and I know that. But I feel a whole lot of people, like the radio station, and a whole lot of people are saying, you're going to win it, and let's champion you. And I feel terrified that I'll let them down.
I can understand that because then you've been nominated for a gold before, haven't you?
Last year too.
And you didn't win.
Yeah.
And then the sympathy's almost worse.
That's the thing, is that people are saying, oh, I'm
you
so
was
sorry.
robbed.
Yeah. And people say that so well-meaningly.
Yeah.
But you go, it's okay. Really, it's okay. I'm crying only because it's actually okay. Don't pity me. It's okay.
Yeah, pity's awful. What are the Logies like from the inside?
It's a funny night. It's a long night. And people have always laughed at the Logies, but at the same time, they are all we have for the markers of our television awards. I know we have our Walkleys and we have our film awards, but this is TV's thing. And I've always felt that I often think that when I see someone new win the New Talent Award, this means so much to them, as it should. And there are many peer-voted awards too, but also if the public vote for you, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
And I wish people would let it be a big deal, or not up itself big deal, but you don't have to sneer at it because why not celebrate it? Advertising has its awards. The housing industry has its awards. Why do we razz ourselves with them? I don't know.
So how do you prepare for it, and what's the actual night like? I mean,
preparing for it, if you're a Gold Logie nominee in the new world, you've got to be quite robust, I think, because it used to be, and everyone used to make jokes about Don Burke getting his staff to fill out the coupons at Channel 9 and sending them off. And because then people would walk into the room and they knew who was going to win beforehand. There was an embargo, but everyone knew the result. To get around that, they now have voting that reopens the week before and goes right up to the end of the red carpet. So that's great. So the result is a surprise. But what that means, it's turned it into almost like a political campaign. Yeah. It's turned it into that last week is hard yakka. and it's not for the faint-hearted. And you don't ask to be nominated. It's a real privilege to be nominated. That's how I feel.
It's also a task that you have to complete.
But it's really, when people say, well, tell me why you think you should win it. It's that I've had a number of interviews. It's so hard. And Tom and Sam are treating it like and fair enough too if they want to, like this comedy competition, like a Raz. Well, Tom's sort of Tom's like the school sniper, the school bully, picking us all off. It's a different feeling, and I'm not good at it. I'm not good at this. The thrust and
there's a cynicism about it, like almost a satire and a cynicism about it. I always quote back to people something that I read you say in an interview such a long time ago, which I've never forgotten, and that is that television is like pocket money. You never rely on it to – I'm paraphrasing you. You're looking at me blankly.
Oh, my God, I wish I'd said that. That sounds incredible.
You never rely on it to pay your mortgage because it could disappear tomorrow. So you almost look at your TV work, because you've always done TV. You look at it as a bit of a side hustle or a freelance gig, but your main bread and butter has to be somewhere else, and in your case, radio for many, many years. Is that still how you think of it?
Well, now I'm older and I've still got school fees. We still have, expenses and all of that. It's funny, actually, that my brother who works in banking was flummoxed that I'd have a contract that would go for 6 months and then there'd be one that would go for a year. And that's how I've always worked. If you work in the media, that's how it is.
And sometimes it might be axed after 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Quite
Happened
right.
to Andrew Denton.
Yeah, I read in the paper that a show I was on got axed. So that's exactly how it can go. So I was used to it not mattering that much until you have children, and suddenly you think, well, if we want to pay school fees and we want some stability, which is where radio has been brilliant. So I've been doing breakfast radio at WSFM for about probably 13 years, and it was 5 years before that with Andrew. And I really love the job. You know how freeing having a podcast is. This is like a daily podcast. And short of having a podcast, I can't think of any other freedom where you turn up in the morning, you've got thoughts about things you've seen on TV the night before, you've read a book, someone's pissed you off in the traffic and you want to talk about it. It's the most immediate job you can have. And I really, really love it. And I don't fight the hours. I don't mind getting up at 4 o'clock. I'm happy to go to bed early and have an afternoon sleep if I can. I absolutely don't fight that. So TV for me has been, I'll pick the things then that fit happily around that don't take too much time. And that's what I've done.
Have you had pressure from TV to conform to a particular image?
I've been very lucky that I haven't had to. I became a presenter just before the era when people had to be famous to get on TV. Suddenly you had to be a sports person or a spokesmodel or a
Miss Universe contestant.
The people who were nobodies or who'd worked as producers like I had, I think I was the last era of those people to be on television. And when I look back at the way I was allowed to dress, no one probably wanted me to, but no one told me otherwise. I don't think I could do it now. I don't think you'd be allowed to.
Because you've never, in my memory, you've never been sexed up.
No, absolutely.
You've always looked completely yourself.
Yes.
Has that been because you've been adamant about it, or just no one's tried to change you?
I don't think anyone's tried to change me. And there was a time probably when I would have felt so awkward if they did, but I could have done with the help. So I was never strong enough. So much of my career has been accidental, where I was never strong enough to say, I insist on dressing like this. I would just find myself wearing bowling shoes and a skirt on national television. That just happened. And so I didn't do it because I wanted to be quirky. That's just what happened. I had a boy band haircut, shaved at the back, and no one said anything, apart from my mother once when I did a story in a helicopter. She said, gee, your hair was short at the back.
This is about as long as I've ever seen your
hair. I know,
hair.
and this is just below my ears. This has taken 4 years. My hair, I've got 3 strands of it. And it's, and it can.
And
still
they're all
look
having
messy.
a red hot go.
I'm going to have to pin them back any minute because they're getting in my face.
You're going to need to braid them.
I know. It might be a bit heavy just to put it back in one braid. So I was very lucky that no one tried to change. I had the giant shoulder pads. I had ping pong ball earrings. I had all that kind of stuff. I've got one jacket that I wore on Beyond 2000. It must have taken up an entire suitcase. I bought it in America. And it had leather on the shoulder pads. It looked like I was trying to move a sofa. It was extraordinary. And because the trick was I thought it would make my hips look smaller. Like wearing an aircraft carrier makes your hips look small.
You did breakfast radio with Andrew Denton for 4 years. You guys were on TV before that on his show, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
What's your relationship been like with him? What's he like to have as a friend?
We were friends at uni, and I remember he was a year older above me when we first met, and he and I had a very funny relationship where we try and horrify each other. I think the first time I met him, he called me a fishwife, and so we'd go out of our way to try and offend each other. And
back in the days when you were allowed to do
when
that.
I didn't take him straight to HR, taser him. So when we finished uni, we would catch up, and I always loved seeing him. And then when I'd left Beyond 2000, I was wondering what to do next. And he said he had a Channel 7 Tonight show, and he said, "Why don't you come and try something off to the side, a comedy show?" And I only did it because Andrew believed in me, but I was so terrified. It's a big jump to go from being on a science and technology show to having people laugh, hopefully, with you.
It was so funny, that sampling segment that you did on Denton.
It was so hard, though. I remember it's one of those calls that when you get it and they say, come and do this show, you think, I'm going to have to do it, but Joe, I wish you hadn't asked me because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So, and I felt that with so many. Beyond 2000, I felt the same. I wish you hadn't asked me because now I've got to do it. And then afterwards you go, thank God I did that. This was the same. But I found it very difficult for people to have permission to laugh with me or at me. So my segment was sampling, as you say, and it was about real things, about real products. So I didn't have to create comedy out of thin air, which I think saved me and gave me something to hold on to.
Because you're not a stand-up. That's not your style of comedy.
No, but it's funny how serious, like Beyond 2000 was a very funny office. This office was very serious. Comedy was a serious business, and I was surprised by that. So the funny Andrew from uni, seeing him as a boss, he doesn't pull any punches. And it was intriguing to see that side of him. And I think he now looks back on that and wishes he'd been lighter and looser. And that's what radio was good for him to be lighter and looser, because you cannot be a perfectionist, because each day you start with a blank piece of paper, you fill that with what becomes a rundown, you say those words, chuck it out, start again the next day. It can't hang around. It could be your best work.
You
and
can't
it's gone.
obsess over it.
No, you can't, which is liberating and frustrating in equal measure.
When you had your first son, Liam, who had been nicknamed Norbert through your pregnancy on the show, I was one of the people listening on that day that Andrew called you and Harley at the hospital and you announced that you'd had the baby. And, you know, I think I was too young to drive at the time, but maybe I was driving. But you talk about hearing people say, I pulled over in the car and I listened and I wept because it was such a beautiful moment. Can see your eyes getting
I know, and you know
shiny.
why I'm teary at this, because Liam turned 18 last week.
How are you going with that?
And all of this came back to me because people said they remembered where they were when he was born.
Yeah.
And I'm at the stage now, which is why I'm getting weepy, that he's in his last year of school and he's talking about maybe studying out of home next year in a different state. And so suddenly, in the blink of an eye, I'm holding on to his little feet as he goes. And I've been so sooky about it. And I'm watching his football, and he's a giant prop. He's massive. And he's getting smashed on and running over people on the football field. But it's in a blink of an eye. I saw his ultrasound. I saw his cells go from 6 to 8. And people say it goes so quickly, and you go, oh, whatever, because those early years can be so slow. But here I am, and I'm having the beginnings of endings, the sixth form events, the university talks, and why I get emotional too at this is that my mum's no longer here, and I think how casually and how cavalierly I left home.
Yeah.
And just the good grace, I want to say thank you, because the grace with which you have to let your child go. And I feel like my life began when he was born, and now that's just the forward. His life's from here. He writes it from here. And yet that's everything to me. So as it was when I left home, my life, I felt starter when I left home. Yeah. How can I be that small a piece in his life?
Oh, I know. I found that last year of school and the turning 18 just the most brutal of parenthood, just the most melancholy and painfully, beautifully sad.
And yet how
transitioning to that different type of relationship and saying, what role do I have in his life? And also reflecting on all the little boys who aren't there anymore.
You know, I go somewhere and I see someone holding the hand of a toddler and I just want to say, can I have a day of that? Can I have one more day of that? Because you're never aware at the time it's the last day your little child holds your hand. But I'm aware aren't we lucky to cry over healthy children?
Yeah.
I just, you know, it's an indulgence and a wonderful, happy indulgence to cry over healthy children. And I get it. And that he's in a transition phase as he should be. The boys go to a school where they go away for 6 months in year 9.
How's that?
And it's amazing. And it's the first time as a parent I've had to put myself second to their needs, because in that year, in year 9, they physically change and you want to see them every day. And you can't. And you can't phone them. They write you letters. They have no Wi-Fi. And it's that tribal thing of taking a boy and you have to acknowledge the man that comes back. I get emotional when I think about it, because at the school, it's a Scottish school, and that's its heritage. And they play the bagpipes when the boys come back, and they have their own, to get home, they call it the long journey home. And they take 4 days to come home from Kangaroo Valley. And every night they write a letter to their future selves. They talk about who they want to be and what it means and all of that. And it is that thing, because we helicopter parent, we're in their faces. And so this is a lesson for us. Don't judge who you want your child to be. Who do you see come back? Oh, makes me cry. And the school embraces them before the parents do. And that's part of it too. Everything's very tribal, it feels, that they're part of a community. And your relationship is one part of it, but it's not everything.
It's time to step back.
Yeah.
That's what it tells you, right?
Yeah.
And then when they leave school, it's time to step back again.
Or not.
And then when they fall in love, it's time to step back again.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
That's where I am now.
Oh, no.
There's so much that people don't tell you. I think because your kids, I imagine yours were the same, didn't want you to talk about them much on the radio probably at a certain point, like those teenage years where they're so intensely private. And then, so we all stopped talking about our kids in some ways. And so there's so many of these things, and you stop reading the parenting books, but then all these things happen and you just go, why didn't anyone warn me about this? It feels like birth all over again, but of a different kind.
And it is the mark of you as a parent, how graciously you let these transitions happen. And I can see how easily you could stuff it up.
There's you and me like Garfield cats. Don't go.
Or I see that thing from Alien on his face.
Yeah. I love you. Just talk to me.
Talk to me.
How do you feel about getting older?
I've never had a job dependent on my looks, which is good.
You're on TV. It's a little bit dependent.
I know that it was dependent. That's right. But there were always women who got other jobs around me who looked extraordinary, and I was never one of those. So, but for all of us, I'll walk past a window, and you know when you don't have a chance to put your face on and hold your stomach in, you think, who's that middle-aged woman? Or look, there's my auntie.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, look at my hands on the steering wheel and think it's my mum. So I want to be good with it, but I'm not always good with it. But I want to be. It is. And part of me is very sanguine and proud to be 57. We've all lost friends. You think what they would have given to have another birthday.
Yep.
And how dare we complain about getting older? Aren't we lucky to be getting older? But there are days when I do breakfast radio, when I look in the mirror and think, oh, my God, that's hard to look at. So I do full makeup to go into radio because I don't feel I can be my best if I feel like a bag lady.
Do you go out, like in public, I imagine you get recognised a lot. Do you feel pressure to put makeup on when you go out?
I don't feel pressure from other people. I live near a beach area, and if I take the dog for a walk in the morning, I'll never wear makeup, and I'll stop and have coffee afterwards at a coffee shop and things. But if I was going to go to the shops maybe, I'd probably put some on for me more than anything.
It's armour in a way, isn't it?
It is a bit. And the other day I was sitting at home and I thought, oh, how nice. I won't have a shower all day. What a nice feeling. And I got to lunchtime and thought, no, I'm going to have a shower and put some makeup on. I just felt I wasn't pleasing myself. So I actually don't feel pressure from other people.
Yeah.
I just do that for me, I think.
You've been with Harley for more than half your life.
God.
For those just embarking on a long-term relationship, what have you learnt about how marriage or monogamy, I guess, changes over decades of being together?
Oh, there are periods of not caring, which is, they say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I think that's very true. And there are periods of indifference in a long-term relationship. I've just read The Course of Love by Alain de Botton, and I took quite a lot out of it. And you know what? In our culture, in our movies and things, we celebrate the beginnings of relationships and the endings of relationships. We pay no attention in popular culture to the middle. And so that's what we never see reflected is the day-to-day, the boredom. And everyone says, oh, let's have a date night and work on your marriage. I'm not that kind of person.
Date nights, man. It's just not the pressure.
If it is the pressure.
Yeah.
There have been months where I've just either looked at the back of Harley's head while he's watching television and I'm standing behind him in the kitchen, or we're sitting side by side watching the television. And I'm happy with that. I think if I wanted happiness and perfection every day, well, then you don't have a long-term relationship. So me being slightly emotionally lazy, I think probably helps a little bit. But in any long-term relationship, there'll be periods where you don't try very hard, and then there'll be absolute jewels where you think that's what this is about. That's the pearl of the long-term rubbing of the sand. It's probably quite an apt analogy.
I like it.
And then you'll go through a period where you're just tasting salt water, and then you'll find another pearl.
Then you vomit.
And you vomit. Why haven't I got more pearls? So I have no answers to it other than I think the rewards can come for the long haul if your expectations are normal.
So much of what you have in common in a marriage, if you have children, are your children. And you talk about them and, usually they live with you. Once they start to move on out, do you find yourself going, what have we got? What are we left with? Like there's a hole.
Absolutely.
Is there a hole?
I wonder if that's part of me being fretful at the children going. We had 10 years as a couple before we had children. But as I said, that feels like someone else's life. My real life began when they were born. We're going on holidays for 2 weeks and the children aren't coming. And if I had my way, they would be. And for the rest of their lives, they would be. But that Liam wants to stay at home and do stuff for the HSC, and his brother's got stuff to do with school and is happy not to be coming. I don't know how I'll be even just in 2 weeks without them. I'll get some books read, and I'm attracted at the idea of being bored because I can't remember the last time I had nothing to do. I'm not good at having nothing to do. I think I want nothing to do, but then when I've got time on my hands, I get itchy. So I'm having enforced nothing to do. But it'll be a precursor. Sure, lying in a beautiful resort somewhere is not the same as being in your own home, but a precursor to who are we when the children aren't there.
Yeah.
So if I don't drown him.
It's a big question, isn't it?
If I don't drown Harley, we'll be doing okay.
What about the whole palaver of getting ready for the Logies? The dress, the hair and makeup, of that, and for TV.
I'm not good at that.
Do you enjoy any part of it?
It's funny for Dancing with the Stars. I had dress fittings for very glamorous outfits, and all my friends said, that must be great. I found it so difficult. I never went to boarding school. Friends of mine who went to boarding school are happy to strip off and just stand there in your underpants. I've never been that person. So
Except when you have a baby, presumably, when you lose all inhibitions.
I guess that day, yes.
Yeah.
Not for the conception.
No, sell tickets for that. No,
Getting
but
Spanx on.
when you're lying
Well,
there
that's
and you're like,
no.
sell tickets, I don't care.
Absolutely, that's right. But it's hard to. I was measured and very nice wardrobe people and sympathetic. They know I'm not 20-year-old supermodel, and they'd stand up and say, and I'm the first person to say, look at my gut. And I talk about myself in a way that I don't, I know I shouldn't. Look at my gut, look at my bum, is that hanging out? So having to have clothes made is very hard for me, only because it's the least part of my job. Like with all that Dancing with the Stars clothes, they did a wonderful job and I loved all the clothes, but I thought, that's great, but my job hasn't started yet. My job starts on show 1 when I actually do the job. So that still to me is peripheral to the job. And same with the Logies and comfortable shoes. And I do say to them, to the designers, look, I've got to be able to do a wee. I've got to be able to sit down. And I've got to be able to have shoes that are relatively comfortable. So please help me with all of that.
Is it a long night?
You have your makeup done about midday. It's like being a bride.
Oh, my God.
And then you get dressed at about 3, and then at 4 o'clock you start to make your way in and the red carpet for Gold Logie takes 2.5 hours. And my feet were killing me by the end. I wanted to go home. As soon as I got inside, I thought, I've done the hard yards. Can I just go home now?
Hasn't started yet.
Hasn't started now.
Get ready for 4 hours of ceremony.
That's
with lots of cutaway close-ups of your face reacting.
Yeah.
So you can't even just sit there and pick your nose.
No, you can't even sit there and have a Valium. And I sound like I'm whinging, and I'm not, because people would dream of this.
But it's interesting to know what goes on behind the scenes. Like it seems, but it's work. It's just a different aspect of work.
It's a different part of work. And for some people, that's the bit they love. And I wish I was more like that. That's the bit I put up with, really.
To get to do the work.
Yes, ironically.
Do you like doing TV as much as you like you clearly love doing radio, like, as you say, the creativity, you get to come in, have a podcast, the freedom. When you're on TV, it's much more produced. There's many more people involved. There's many more layers between you and the audience in terms of what you're going to say and how it's phrased and the timing before you go to a commercial break. How do you compare the two things in terms of what they give you?
All those things of radio that you've just said, yes, that's the stuff I love. But I have elements of that in TV as well. So sometimes, like with the living room, there's a structure, but we muck around. And that's what I loved about Dancing with the Stars, is there's very much a structure, is that here's your judges, here's your performers. But within that, elements of ad-libbing. And it was such a big show. It was in this big auditorium and it was big.
Big shiny floor show.
Big shiny floor show. And I felt that was a culmination for me of all the skill sets I'd learnt along the way. Is reading an auto cue, structure, voices in my ear, head noises.
Having to ad-lib.
And then having to ad-lib and try and be comedic and all of that. I felt it was, and I thought, what a gift at 57 to be given an opportunity that sums up everything you've learned. And I loved it, and I was really grateful for it.
I hope you win the Logie. You deserve it.
Only because you really I'm task-driven. But it's not even about deserving. And if I don't win it, I want people to know that's okay.
I'll send you a text going, you was robbed.
I know. I'll say, mole.
I have one more question. What do you do to recharge? Because you seem so extroverted. You're so effervescent and engaging and animated. Are you a true extrovert that recharges by being around people, or is it something that you are able to do, but then to actually recharge, you have to do something different?
So I'd never think of myself as an extrovert. I think I've learned over the years to host a conversation, if that makes sense, so I can walk into a room and get along. But I do have a lot of downtime in that I'm happy to lie in my bedroom and have an afternoon sleep and read a book. I'll do that every day if I can. And to sit quietly is something I do a lot. And I've got a very tight circle of girlfriends, and we have a daggy book club, and we'll catch up for a drink and a laugh, and that recharges too. So I have a very quiet home life, really. So maybe that's the answer.
And that enables you to turn it on in your job.
Maybe.
Go get him. Go bring home the gold, my friend.
And if not, that's okay.
You was robbed. Well, see what I mean about the tears being unexpected? Just as we were talking and I was asking her about giving birth to her first son, Liam, I noticed her eyes getting really shiny, and I was really surprised because Amanda is someone I've known for a long time, but I've not seen that sort of vulnerable side. She's always so professional and she's never short of a word, and that's why I really love talking to her, because it was one of those moments that we both found really unexpected. And I had the year that she's having a few years ago where I cried pretty much through the whole year when my eldest was leaving school. So it just started me up again, and it was a really beautiful moment for us to bond. And I didn't know how to tell her that it's going to get worse before it gets better, because he hasn't actually left school yet. But you know what you could do to cheer Amanda up? You could vote for her to win a Gold Logie. Just search Gold Logie voting in Google and you will find the link. And voting closes on the 30th of June as the Logies go to air. So please get in quick and show your support for Amanda Keller. If you're looking for something to listen to next, there's a podcast we have called Before the Bump. It's a really short series. There's only 4 episodes in it, and it's co-hosted by Rachel Corbett and Zoe Marshall. And it's all about pre-conception. It's about people who have fertility problems, people who don't, and it's been named one of Apple's top 10 podcasts of the year so far. And it's been hugely popular with women who don't necessarily have fertility problems, but just want to know what their future self might be up for. So a lot of the young women here at Mamamia and a lot of the listeners have contacted us and say, I learned so much from this podcast. It's a fun, informative, entertaining way that, teaches you things you might not know about your fertility and how to get pregnant when you actually want to do that. Because we spend so much of our lives trying not to get pregnant that when you do try to get pregnant, I speak from experience, it can be a real shock as to how difficult it can be when you really want to. So search for Before the Bump wherever you find your podcasts, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes for this one. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. Until next time, I am Mia Friedman, and I will see you on Mamamia.